Welcome to the Complexity Theory Podcast. My name is Zach McCormick, and I am a lawyer, but this is not legal advice. Today, my guest is Joseph Cassell, and I didn't have to go too far to look for him because he happens to be my own father-in-law. And it's probably because of the fact that I've had the privilege of knowing him this long that I've heard some of the most entertaining and fascinating stories from any living person. And so we're going to talk to him a little bit today, and we're going to see what he decides to tell us. To be candid, I hear a new story usually every time he gets to talking. So we're going to see what he has for us today. I'm pleased to have you on the show, Joseph. Thanks very much for coming on.
Well, thanks for inviting me. And I think you need to get out more if I'm the most interesting person you've ever met.
I'll tell you, there was a commercial not too long ago, and I think it was a beer commercial, and they had this guy, and they billed him as the most interesting man in the world.
I've seen those, yeah.
And you watch it, and you're like, yeah, I guess if that guy was real, that would be the most interesting man in the world. But you know he's an actor, and you know that it's a script he's reading, and you know that it's all Hollywood, magic and cut scenes and all that kind of stuff. So when I first met you, I was a teenager. That's how long we've known each other.
Yes, you were 16, I think.
Something like that, yeah.
Well, I think you were driving because you met at the play.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Yeah. Anyway.
And the funniest part for me was... you would just kind of casually peel these stories out of your memory banks, just like a guy pulling a couple bucks out of his wallet. And I'm just sitting there saying, oh my gosh. And now you've got grandkids because I've got sons, and here we are. And these stories are going to be preserved for posterity's sake, if nothing else. So before we kind of get into that, because... it's the kind of thing where I know you have to kind of be in the right mindset, to kind of take us down that memory lane. Just a little background, because it's not so uncommon for someone born in California to end up in Florida these days. But at the time that you were kind of figuring out, I think, where you were going to put down roots, you were still a young man. You were in college, right?
Not really. I went to 2 years of college at San Luis Obispo in California. Beautiful. California has a lot of beautiful parts of the country. They call it Slow Town, SLO, to avoid saying
cool
San Luis Obispo every time. And I don't know who Obispo was. San is there is a Catholic from the 1800s church there. But most of them are San Miguel, San this. I don't know who Obispo was. But I went through 2 years of college, and me and two friends that summer going into my junior year, it was their senior year, went home, worked in the summer. We had a house that we rented along with like three other people back in those days. You took 6 people to pay the mortgage, plus it was fun. On a house. And we all worked in an agricultural form of work because that's where I was raised. And somehow, and to this day I can't remember how it happened, we got to talking about traveling. We wanted to go to Europe for some reason. It was exotic for Californians.
What year were yours?
This was the summer of 71. And so... somehow, again, the three of us, Frank and Earl and me, decided to do this, take a year off from college. So we found an old, kind of a commercial station wagon, if you will, called a carryall. I think it was made by International Harvester, which you don't see those anymore.
Yeah, I mean, you think of that as farm equipment manufacturers usually. But...
Yeah, and they used to make some vehicles for the road. So first thing we decided is we might as well rebuild the engine. If we're going to go on a major trek, we want it to make sure it runs right. Well, out of the three of us, I probably knew most about it, and I wasn't a mechanic per se, but I had some experience working for my father, and back then you used to fix cars yourself. So we had a garage where I lived out in the country, and the boys would come by. This is after the summer and after we did our work and saved as much money as we could. And our work consisted of, mine especially, I was a USDA peach inspector. And I had a badge, USDA, my name on it, Cassell.
You were a Fed.
I was a Fed, an employee of the Fed anyway. And had a lot of power, quite frankly. There's some good stories that came out of that. I did that for 3 summers. I had to be 18, and I turned 18 in the summer. Or my birthday was in July. So we, for about 6 to 8 weeks every summer was peach season, and they would harvest them, put them in big bins, bring them to the station. We had these special cards that were marked, and if it was 12 bins, you would take 2 samples. If it was more, up to 16, you take 3. And anyway, there was a system that USDA had figured out. And you would mark these as the truck would come in and weigh itself. You'd mark these bins. Again, they had these cards that would randomly choose, and we'd put a mark on them. And then a forklift driver would take them off, and they ran them across this machine, which is called a sorter. And in this machine was basically a belt that would run, and every so often on the belt it had a hole in it about this big, about 8 by 8, 10 by 10. And what that would entail is they dumped the peaches on the belt, and as it ran, a certain amount would fall through these holes and trail into a bucket. Then the bucket was put on our table. We had special white lights, daylight bulbs over the table, and we would look for defects, overripe and bruise, green, any number of things. There was basically about 5 or 6 of them, and we had these buckets. And the reason they went through all this and the dichotomy of it was on one side was the processors, Del Monte, Sunsweet, stuff like that. They were buying this fruit from the farmers, the ranchers. And on the other side was the ranchers. And if we said that if we determined that 10% of that fruit was bad for whatever reason, and they had 10,000 pounds of fruit, they only got paid for 9,000 pounds. And so economically, you can see the difference between the two. The Sunsweet people and others wanted as much deducted from the weight as possible.
The buyers.
The buyers, yes. And the sellers, the farmers, they wanted as least deducted. So here we were stuck in the middle. We were a judge of sorts. And again, we had almost ultimate power on that platform. And there was about 80 of them in the 2 or 3 counties that I worked in. And you would get transferred every 2 or 3 days, so you weren't in one place and couldn't develop a relationship with the farmer or blah, blah, you know. And so, and here you give this, and it's not the authority, but you give these responsibilities to an 18-year-old kid.
Yeah.
More so than a young man at that age, you know.
I mean, you're still a teenager.
Yeah, still a teenager. Raw recruit. I happen to have a little bit interesting start. They put you with another guy who knows the ropes, and you're supposed to spend about 5 days with him, and he's looking over your shoulder and you know, guiding you on how to do this stuff properly. And after about 3 days, I think it was, he comes to me one day at the end. He says, "You ready to go off on your own?" And I said, "I don't know. You think so?" He says, and he turns over his shoulder and he goes, "Yeah, he'll do it." And what happened
You got volunteered.
What happened is they needed more graders, official graders, than they had at that time. And so they shoved me out into the field a couple days early. Now, the interesting part of this particular story is I was at this station in Yuba County, which has nothing bearing to the story. And so I felt reasonably confident. There was certain paperwork to do and that kind of stuff. And I was by myself because it wasn't supposed to be a big day, if you will. So in comes the trucks, and I go over and I mark them like I'm supposed to. And they pull the bins off, they dump them, and out comes scads of peaches, but they're all about this big around. They're small, and we had a ring size that had to fit.
About a $50 size, maybe?
They were
$1.
No, they were more than a $50. They
Golf
were
ball?
silver dollar at the minimum, almost. And I can't think. Maybe the top of your cup is about the minimum, is what we call the ring that we had. And when you were normally grading, you'd see a few and you'd check them. If they fit through the ring, they were too small, they went in a small bucket. So these things were coming across. It was about a 40% small grade. Now, the good news for me is that wasn't something you could argue with, even the farmer, And so we had a system, if it went over 15%, up to 20%, it was called a red tag. And the farmer had the choice of running the fruit over a on-site sorter where they had some ladies, usually Spanish, Mexican ladies in California, and they would go through and they would pull out some of the fruit that was easily looking bad, and then he would run it through the machine again in my testing, and then if it came back below 15%, then again he got paid for that. And on that machine, they had a belt with rings on it that would take the small fruit out. So 40% was called a blue tag. Blue tag, if they had it, would have bells and whistles going off. Doot, 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 watch out, watch out.
Yeah.
And and that required a special type of paperwork, which I didn't know. So they had a phone there at the place. I called in, and lo and behold, I get the guy who was training me. He was training an in-class group, and he's all excited because he's got a live blue tag on the phone.
Wow.
And so he walks me through the whole system of what to do, what to tell the farmer, the whole system. And again, I was lucky this time because small fruit is hard to argue with. I had some other situations that weren't that easy. But anyway, I went through this blue tag. He ran his fruit over. Out of 1,500 pounds that was in a bin, about 800 pounds came back because it was so small. Now, does the manufacturer or does the processor throw that away? Not a chance. They just don't pay for it, and they use it in puree, baby food, stuff like that. It's not rotten. It's just small. But
you never think about that.
The farmer gets penalized more so.
Wow.
Now,
so unhappy farmer that day.
Unhappy farmer. Well, he knew it too. He could see in the bins.
He just knew
small.
He was coming in with a low yield.
I mean, what happened? I don't know.
Gotcha.
Could have been lack of water during the growing process or something like that.
So there you are. You're in, would you call it northeastern, northwestern? What portion of California?
Yuba City, where I was born and raised, is in the northern part of California. It's in the valley above Sacramento, if people know where that is.
Okay. So there you are, 18 years old. You've got a good job. You've got some mechanical ability. You're living in a house with college kids. You, Frank, and Earl get your hands on a station wagon.
Sorts. It's a small type delivery van is what it was.
Kind of an early type of sport utility vehicle.
Yes, it could be. Sure.
Adapted.
It was a 50s model car.
Oh wow.
And this was 1970, like I said, 71.
And so these three college kids, you and two other guys, decide travel.
Essentially, yeah.
And that kicks off quite a few adventures, if my memory serves, based on what you told me. But where do you start? I mean, where do you say you want to end up in Europe? But...
We started with fixing the truck up, and that took us most of the fall. A friend of ours from college, and he lived with us in that summer in that house from Los Angeles. He came up and he found a job, and which jobs were plentiful during the summertime. He was getting married that fall. So when we left our hometowns and we drove down to Los Angeles area and went to his wedding, which was interesting, seeing how we all we had was hiking boots, and they rented tuxedos for us, but we looked interesting in hiking boots,
Right.
standing there in the pictures.
Dressed up on top, work on bottom.
Yeah, kind of like that. And there was no polish or anything. But his father was fairly well-to-do. He got married on a hillside overlooking the Pacific Ocean in a very ritzy part of the area at that time. And, you know, it was a very, for us especially, very ritzy after-wedding reception and everything. And so we got through that, and we left from there, and we headed a little bit south and headed east, and ended up in towards New Mexico, and we also had another kind of a rule between the three of us. We'd all take turns driving one day at a time. So every third day, you'd be behind the wheel, and no questions asked. That driver could go anywhere he wanted to go.
Interesting.
Any direction he wanted to go. Now, in one day, you'd only make maybe 300 miles if you worked at it. But that's just the thing we had. Now, we didn't really have any problem with it because we all just kind of said, well, let's go north. Let's go here. And so we just kind of meander. And we went up towards, here's my age kicking in, Grand Canyon. And this was before Thanksgiving.
Still 1971?
Still 1971, yeah. Before Thanksgiving. And so we stopped and got about 2 pounds or so of hamburger and the buns and about a pound of cheese because we didn't have a refrigerator or anything. This wasn't a motorhome. So we got what we needed for the day. And we drove to this place called Havasupai. It was an Indian reservation in an Indian tribe. H-A-V-U-H, I don't know, whatever, Havasupai. And they had, I assume it was a part of this Grand Canyon where they probably spent, who knows, maybe 1,000 years, and named after them. And so we got off the main road and drove about 20 miles on a dirt road. Had some pretty good mud puddles in it and stuff like that, but didn't have any real problem getting there. And we get to the edge of the canyon. There's a little kind of a wide spot. You can see where other people have camped and parked. And we also, one other thing I got to add to this story is Earl had an Afghan Hound dog.
So there was 4 of you on this trip.
So essentially there was 4 of us, yeah. And I'm not sure who was the smartest of the 4. But I am one thing, it wasn't the dog. Afghans aren't known for their mental acuity.
We're going to get hate mail from Afghan Hound owners.
No,
I'm sure,
probably not. I
No?
think it's a pretty universal thing.
Nice.
He was a great dog. He was and beautiful when he ran. Oh, we used to take him to the beach.
Yeah.
Because San Luis Obispo was only 10 miles from Pismo Beach and that kind of stuff. So we'd take him to the beach, and when he ran, that long hair on his and his ears would just flow in the wind. He was amazing when it came to that. Outside of that, you know, you couldn't tell if the lights were on or not most of the time.
So he's your 4th.
So he's our 4th. Yeah,
right.
He's the wild card, if you will. So we get out of the truck. Zephyr, that was his name. Zephyr is a divine wind or something like that. Is where the name comes from. And we walk over to look over this Grand Canyon. I mean, it's, I don't know, 5 miles across to the other side. And it's just something that's hard to describe, even from pictures and stuff. But we're sitting there, looking at this, amazed, as everybody is. And as we look around, and we look down, 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 and below us, about 300 feet, there's a trail. There's quite a few in there that go down. You can see a trail, and there's a man laying on the ground with his arms like this and his head down.
So for the listeners, spread eagle basically.
Spread
arms
eagle.
up above his head, face down in the
Face
dirt.
down, you know, right almost below us. I mean, he could have tripped where we were standing and probably fallen on this path. And of course, we look at it, and we're waiting for him to move. Not a peep. So we're looking at each other. What should we do? Well, you know, if he did fall, we can't just leave him there. Let's go find out. So we saw where the trail starts, And we start working our way down.
So this is like a switchback then?
Of sorts, yeah. You get so steep, you have to have quite a few switchbacks. So we walk down there, and we get close to him, 10 feet. Still haven't seen any movement at all. And we walk and we get around him, we're circling, we're looking, and finally I can see a little bit of dust coming out where his mouth is. So I assume he's breathing, and I look at his chest, and he's breathing very shallow. Still not sure if he fell or not. And so I forget who it was. One of us, I think, reached down and touched his shoulder and said, hey, you okay? And he his head pops up. He looks around. He's got dirt on one side of his face, and he looks at us. He's as confused as we are at that point. And he says, who are you? He says, we're just some people. We saw you laying here. You okay? He goes, yeah, I'm okay. He says, I just needed a nap or something. I forget his exact words, but
bottom of the Grand Canyon, just needed a nap.
He was an Indian. He was a Havasupai, we determined, and he was drunk. Not to put the two together, but in this case, it was true. So anyway, he was facing up the hill, so he was coming up to the top. And so he said, can you walk? Are you going to stay here? And no, he says, I need to go up and make a phone call. And we're shaking our head, phone call.
1971. It's not like someone had a cell phone to pull out of their pocket.
Oh, no. And we didn't see a regular payphone anywhere up there. So he starts wandering up this path, fairly steep, and we're following him. And he's staggering a little bit. I'm kind of worried he's going to go off the other side. One side was like a cliff. The other side was like another 1,000-foot drop,
Oh, on both sides?
One side, because of the way the path is cut in, worked in, cut in. One side you got sheer rock and dirt, and the other side you got another 1,000 feet or more you could fall down. Gee. And the path is half the size of this table. It's about 6 feet wide. Anyway, he gets to the top, and we're behind him. And he walks over to the one telephone pole there. And on the telephone pole is a black box about this. He opens it, and lo and behold, there's a phone in there. I assume the federal government put a phone up there for him, being the good guys that they are,
Well, you were one of them.
Well, I was
you were a Fed.
That's right. In the summertime, I was one of them, And so he dials some numbers like it was a regular phone, and he's got the phone to his ear, and we're sitting there kind of wondering what's going on. And his first words was, hello, Stinky. This is Tit. And we knew we were in the Twilight Zone about that part, And
wow.
He says a couple other things, and he hangs the phone up.
Stinky, this is Tit.
Yeah, that was their names.
Wow.
That was their, I don't know if they were Indian names or not, but that was
wow.
That was the monikers he used. About 10 minutes later, a real station wagon pulled in to where we were at, we assumed was Stinky. And the other guy, not to belabor his name, the other guy kind of waved to us and said good luck and hi and see you later. And he got in, and as he got in, I saw Stinky hand him a little flask, and they were drinking again. And off they went down this dirt road,
Good grief.
So we were a little...
I mean, that's a heck of a story. I mean, because at the end of the day, what is it? You guys, you see the Grand Canyon, you look down, everyone does at some point.
Mm-hmm.
And incidentally, I agree with you. When you look at it, it's almost too big to perceive with the human eye. It's like you can't fully take all of the visual in, which is something I've never experienced before. But there you are at the Grand Canyon. You look down, you see a guy spread eagle 300 feet below you. You're thinking the worst. And it ends with a phone call. Hello, Stinky. This is Tit. Okay.
Yeah.
But that's not quite the end of it, because I think you had a fourth in your party, right?
Yeah, you're right. There is one more chapter left. Actually, there's two. So we, of course, remarked among ourselves, how weird that was and that kind of stuff, laughed about it. So we went back to our carryall, opened the door, and here's Zephyr laying on the floor of back there. Looks like he ate a raccoon or something. And what he ate was our 2 pounds of hamburger, the pound of cheese, and every last bit of the dozen hamburgers, buns that we bought.
Boy.
And that was our to be our Thanksgiving dinner on the Grand Canyon. We were PO'd, to say the least. So verbally, we took it out on Zephyr, yelled at him, and all he could do was lie there, sick as he was with all that food in his stomach, with his tongue hanging out and everything. So we booted him out of the truck, and he was mad enough that we had a leash on him, so we couldn't lose him. He was mad enough. He went out about 25 feet, stretched his head as far as he could, laid down in the dirt, so he could get away from us as far as he could.
Just to ignore you.
Just to ignore us.
Yeah.
And so we ended up having some canned stuff. We had some canned corn, something else, 2 or 3 cans of stuff. We had a little stove, and we made like a stew, or what they used to call it, mulligan stew, I think. And we called it Have a Soup I Stew because of our thing. So that was our dinner.
Not the Thanksgiving you planned.
Not the Thanksgiving we planned.
Something.
And Zephyr, after about 3 hours, the raccoon was slowly going through his system,
Yep.
and we calmed down and brought him back inside. And so we all bedded down for the night. And it was blustery. It was November. Mm-hmm. It was blustery, cold, and that kind of stuff. Well, we all get bedded down. Some reason I woke up, I think it was around midnight, 1 o'clock, and I looked out the window of the truck, and it was snowing.
Oh, boy.
And we weren't familiar with that part of the country, but snow, when you're 20 miles off on dirt roads, is not necessarily a good thing, and we didn't know. You didn't have all the fun we had these days, just get a phone and see what the weather report is.
And you're in an uninsulated truck.
Yeah, it was cold. I mean, there was no doubt. But we had sleeping bags. That wasn't the real problem. The real problem is I was worried about getting stuck there somehow if it snowed or rained too much because of that dirt road. So I rousted the boys and said, we got to get out of here. And they pretty much agreed. So I jumped behind the driver's seat, unzipped the bottom of my bag, still have it around me. And
you're driving in your sleeping bag.
I'm driving in my sleeping bag.
It makes sense.
Well, it was cold.
That
And
makes
I
sense.
didn't have pants on,
Yeah, it makes
so
sense.
I just, And so while they're trying to put the truck together in the back, I'm key hauling down this dirt road again, going through mud and everything. And we get out to the main road 30 minutes or so later, and we drive down the road a little bit. We pull over and feel safe when we're on paved road. And we finished sleeping that night. And got up the next day, and I forget what town it was, but we drove to a town, and we had KFC for our Thanksgiving meal. It was the only place that was open at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And other than the wedding, that kicked off an interesting trip across the country.
That was the start.
That was just
the start.
That was just the first 2 weeks.
Wow. Okay.
First week and a half, maybe.
So from the Grand Canyon, you're saying that was the trailhead. Where did it take you from there?
We went north and ended up in Cheyenne, Wyoming. Again, why we went north, none of us will ever know why. It was already snowing, so we go north. We, like I said, and the brain trust in that truck wasn't exactly at the highest level. Now, give us some school books, we probably could have done pretty well, but survival wasn't our instinct at the time.
That's funny.
So we went up to Cheyenne, Wyoming, and first and really the only time I ever walked on water. It was so cold that there was a small lake that we found, and 'cause we had to stop several times to let Zephyr do his business and stuff. And he was a treat on the ice because his feet couldn't grab the ice,
Wow.
and he kept falling down. And Afghans, I'm sorry, Afghan people, but Afghans can have a pretty dumb look on their face, and he excelled that day in his dumb look about why won't my feet stay underneath me. And so
It was new for him. He'd never experienced
new for
it.
us
Yeah,
too,
right.
for that matter. But we didn't end up falling on our butts. You know? And from Cheyenne, Wyoming, we started heading east.
Okay.
Well, that was good in the sense on maybe going to Europe, but still cold as can be. So actually, we were actually heading to a town across from St. Louis where Frank had a grandmother. And we thought we could go there and
You're coming up on Christmas time.
to visit. He hadn't seen her in many years. And it would give us a couple days to clean clothes and do this and that. And so we were kind of heading in that direction.
Now you weren't living in hotels. You were living in the truck.
Oh no, we spent the night in the truck. Two would sleep on the bottom, the back, and we made ourselves a sling that we would pull out at night. And so the third guy would sleep up on the sling, and Zephyr would sleep in the front seat or on the floorboard. So, because it was so cold, I mean, we wake up, there was frost on the inside of the truck from our breath.
Yeah.
You know, it'd take us 20 minutes to get the truck started because we didn't have the proper battery for that cold of weather.
Yeah.
20 minutes and then scrape off the ice just so we could see where we're going. And we did have a heater. That was the good news. We could keep the front of the truck warm. And in the course of traveling from Cheyenne, Wyoming towards this town in Missouri, one night it was too cold and we didn't let Zephyr out to do his business. Well, a couple hours later, he couldn't stand it, so he's up in the front on the floorboard, passenger side floorboard, just letting his bladder loose because he just couldn't hold it any longer. We were too cold to argue with him. Because the temperature never got above freezing, it just froze into our carpet. You know?
Oh, jeez.
And you couldn't smell it because it was frozen.
Yeah. Then.
So later that day, we're driving down the road, probably 10 or 11 o'clock. The heater's working. It's slowly warming up the cab. We're wearing jackets and stuff, but we weren't that uncomfortable. Pretty soon we start.
Oh, boy.
You smell something? Yeah, I do.
Man.
It dawned on us that all that dog urine was
Oh boy.
melting in the front passenger side. Jeez. So we stopped the car, yanked the carpets out of the floor, threw them along the side of the road, and Zephyr got to do his business, and we got on the road again. Just another one of the many little things that just happened to us.
It's interesting because this is a different time. Like to listen to this, there are parts that I think probably anyone today could relate to, but then there are the parts that are really separate and just distinct.
And there's parts that are timely to the times, to the 70s.
Yeah.
And I'm going to expound on that just a little bit when we get to Grandma Sorgie's. But
well, that's where that's the thing, right? You're talking about 3 guys and a dog in a van, and it's a 20-year-old van, basically, that you tried to retrofit. You got this idea to kind of do this. We want to travel. We want to end up in Europe. Yeah. You start off with kind of an interesting, we go where the wind blows us kind of approach, which is neat because that's kind of liberating in a way, right?
It is.
You're not really, we got to stay on schedule.
Other than a long-end plan of wanting to go to Europe for some reason, there was no plan, except maybe Grandma Sorgie's somewhere in the middle, And I not forget, but also when we were rebuilding this vehicle, for some reason we wanted to repaint parts of the engine, so it looked like it was new because we were rebuilding the whole thing.
Sure.
So we painted something blue, and we had some red paint, and we got some white paint, and we painted the entire engine red, white, and blue.
Okay.
The wheel wells and the hood and everything was all blue with white stars all over it, and you couldn't see a thing from the outside.
Huh.
So
you had to pop the hood to see all the stuff.
Time after time after time. This is back in the days you'd pull into a gas station, and the guy would come out and raise your hood to check your oil.
I gotcha.
They'd come to us and fill her up, and he said, check your oil. We'd always smile and go right ahead.
Boom.
And he would pop this big hood, and these young men like us would just step back 2 or 3 steps, and you could just see him looking like this, around the whole thing.
Yeah.
And
how much was gas?
I was telling your mom it was about 35 cents a gallon. Huh. I think we saw it for like 27 cents in one place.
Huh. It's a neat point of reference.
They used to have gas wars in those days, and they would reduce the price of gas from, say, 32 to 29 cents. 3 cents, and people would go to that station.
Buy extra stuff.
Buy 15 gallons, and, you didn't have as much... you didn't have almost anything in the gas stations wasn't sold except maybe a pop machine, soda pop machine, and the rest of it was oil, tires, and that's back when gas stations were strictly for the vehicles. You didn't have all the convenience stores. They didn't realize how much money they could make off of us for that.
Interesting. All right.
It was a whole different time.
And there was a part of you that thought that, you get to the East Coast and you just hop a steamer or something?
That was kind of the vague.
To Europe?
That was kind of the vague idea. Once we got to, we didn't even know where we were going to catch this steamer, if you will. We would just figure it out on the way.
Yeah.
It was really, quite frankly, a haphazard idea as far as having any concrete endings and direction to get there. And, we just, we as they say, we winged it the entire time,
But you winged it all the way to Missouri now. So now it's Frank's grandmother, you said?
Frank's
or
grandmother,
Frank?
So we went one other quick little story. We're going across Kansas. Kansas is a pretty lonely state for the most part, not the cities, but the rural part of it. And there's a road that goes through Kansas. I'm not sure which one it is. That is just a straight road. It's a federal highway, and it's straight for like 100 miles. Nothing moves, nothing changes. And so about this time one night, and I think Frank was driving this time, we're driving and our generator failed on the car. So we're running on battery power. Now, when run battery power in a car in those days, you'd get about 50, 75 miles. We knew there was a town coming up. If we could make it, we could spend the night in the truck, get a new battery or a new generator.
You should generator
for the car.
Alternator.
In those
Same
days,
difference?
they were generators.
Okay.
No, alternators, I couldn't tell you the difference, but in those days, they were called generators, and some cars had alternators. This was a 1954 International. It had a generator. And again, not sure what the difference was. So we're driving down the road, not a headlight to be seen for the last 2 hours, and all of a sudden behind us, Frank says, "There's somebody behind us." And you look back, and as far as you could see, dark night, as far as you could see were two little pinpoints of light. And they're getting close, fast. And they're just about on top of us, about ready to yell, "Get off the road," and the car slams its brakes on. It's a Kansas Highway Patrol. He must have been doing 100 miles an hour out there, probably going home for the morning, finishing his shift. Damn near ran into us. The lights come on, it's Christmas all of a sudden, so we pull over. Now, again, 1971 still, just barely. Hippies. And our hair wasn't that long then, but it was shoulder, maybe about down to our shoulders, barely. And so we were considered California license plates. We were.
You're trouble.
Well, we're trouble. We were a target. We were suspect. We were a lot of adjectives.
So, you still are.
Yeah, there's truth in that. All three of us still are in
Maybe
our own way. Yeah. So Frank pulls over, and the cop comes up, and he's a smoky. He's got the flat hat, and he's got the blousy bottom parts of his pants.
So like the riding pants kind of thing?
Yeah. And he comes up, and I forget his word was basically, "What are you doing?" And then Frank says, "Generator's dead. We're trying to get to the next town." Blah blah blah. And so he looks at us, and I think he looked at Frank's driver's license. He didn't ask anything about me or Earl, and he's shaking his head. And I can see he's already thinking, because I'm assuming it was the middle of the night or something like that. We were deadheading to Grandma Sorgie's at this point, so we were driving like all night. And so I think he assumed, I don't want to mess with these guys. And so he says, "There's a town up here 10 miles. He says, "Pull over and get your generator." Yes, sir. Happy as could be, happy as a clam.
Yeah. No ticket.
And he went around. No
arrest.
He went around us and flew. Like I said, I think he was going home. His 6 o'clock shift was almost over or something like that. And he just left us go on, So we did that. And then it was a day or two later. We were going as Kansas. We finally got into this little town across the Mississippi River. where Grandma Sorgie lived. And again, in those days, we didn't have GPS on our phones, didn't have phones. We had maps and stuff like that. And so we found our way to her house. So this old kind of ratty looking vehicle pulls up. Again, this is 1971. California was full of hippies. The rest of the country was playing catch up, on our lifestyle and stuff out there. Long hair, clothes. Like, we didn't have flowers in our hair, but, neighbors are wondering, what's this old truck doing in the neighborhood? Frank gets out. Frank's a little, sorry, Frank, but he's got a little Cro-Magnon in him. His shoulders kind of rounded, and he kind of lumbered when he walked a little bit.
Yeah.
Earl was normal looking. I was the tall, skinny one. They were about 6 foot. I was 6'3", 6'4" then. Skinny as could be. And so we walk up to Grandma's house. Me and Earl are standing back about 3 steps. And Frank rings the doorbell. Of course, Grandma Sorgie's expecting us. We had made some phone calls. And she opens the door, and Frank's arms come out around her and basically just walks into the house, giving her a big hug. So me and Earl wait about 5 seconds, and we walk in behind him and close the door. So introductions are being made. We met, I forget his real last name. We met Mr. Sorgie, which was Grandma Sorgie's like 4th husband. She was a big woman, nicest people in the world, big woman. And this particular husband was 5'8", pretty skinny. I don't know if Grandma ate the other 3 husbands or not, but he wasn't going to let that happen to him. So we're sitting there talking to him and getting introductions. Frank, of course, mostly more than me and Earl. And then Earl, I notice he's looking out the little window in the door of the house, front door. He's looking out and he's moving his head around back and forth, up and down. And he turns around. He's got a very perplexed, kind of serious look on his face, which is not known for any one of the 3 of us to look that serious. We took this pretty lightly. And he comes over to me and he leans over and he goes, "We're going to die." And I look at Earl and I say, "That seems a little excessive." I said, he's not very big, and I don't think she's going to eat us. At least not till she fattens us up first. And he points over his shoulder, and I go look out the window and the door, and there's about 4 cop cars in the street at different angles. One guy's walking up to the door with his hand on his hip.
On his gun,
on his hip, in case he has to pull it real quick. The other 3 or 4 are standing by their cars, not with guns out, but they're standing behind their cars, and got our van surrounded. And he comes up, and I back away from the door, and I said, everybody called her Grandma, even though it was Frank's. And I said, "Grandma, I think we got company." And she's a little perplexed, and so she goes, before he can even knock, she goes and opens the door, and I forget the guy's name. She goes, "Oh, hi, John, how you doing?" And the local sheriff guy there, he says, "You okay?" He goes, "Oh, I'm fine. It's just my grandson and some friends of his from California." Of course, he was relieved. He didn't have to kill a hippie that day, That's 20 years bad luck.
Right. 20 years bad luck. Break a mirror.
And there's 3 of them there.
Kill a hippie.
He could be He could be done for the rest of his life,
years,
60 years.
Yeah.
So anyway, he comes in. We introduce him, I used to call him Officer Obi from the song that Arlo Guthrie made famous back in the 60s, Alice's Restaurant. And there was a character in there called Officer Obi, so we always referred to him as Officer Obi. And so anyway, he went outside and he waved everybody off and said, "There's no problem," and so they all get in their cop cars and drive away. And he stays, and we talk a little bit, And so this was about a day or 2 before Christmas. And he said, again, in that part of all over the United States, in a lot of rural areas, especially even cities, California was still the golden state of sorts. A lot of people wanted to go there. They wanted to meet people from there, us or anybody else. And, it still had a glow for a different reason than it does maybe today. Today it's got a liberal glow instead of a place of opportunity, And so he invited us to a New Year's Eve party if we were going to be in town.
The sheriff did.
The sheriff did.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sheriff John.
Yeah, Obie.
Obie.
So we said, well, if we're still here, we'll be happy to come, because he wanted some people to meet us. And we knew from other people we met that they were kind of enamored with us being from California. They wanted to know what it's
celebrities
like,
almost.
what it's like out there. Of sorts we were. What's it like out there? Blah, 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 blah. A lot of questions and stuff like that. So we got through Christmas at Grandma's. Now, Grandma had a mission once we were there. And her mission was to fatten these boys up. So a typical day for us at Grandma's was a full breakfast, eggs, bacon, toast, maybe a couple different types of meat, bacon, ham, pancakes, a full breakfast. And then about 10 o'clock, 10:30 in the morning, there'd be a snack before lunch.
Wow.
Now, at first, this
College kids eating well.
At first, this wasn't bad, And then at lunch, usually it was leftovers from the dinner from the night before, which was always a good dinner. And then about 3 in the afternoon, another snack. God forbid we might not make it to dinner, Might just die away right there. Then she'd make another whole dinner, pot roast or this or that or whatever. And this went on for a week or so while we were there, to the point where Earl started faking illness because he was gaining so much weight. He said, I think I caught something. I can't eat 5 meals a day anymore, And I kind of slowed down. Not Frank. No, not Frank. No, the Cro-Magnon, he fattened right up there, Oh, yeah. And Grandma couldn't have been happier feeding 3 hungry boys,
That's sweet.
It was. And at night, Grandma would go to bed, and Grandpa number 4, he'd pull out 4 beers out of the refrigerator. Don't tell Grandma. And we'd all have a beer, and then he'd collect them all, and he was careful to put them down deep into the trash can, as if Grandma didn't know this was going on.
Yeah.
This is what he did, thinking he'd get in trouble for it.
Yeah, right.
And this went on for, like I said, a week and a half that we were there. So we did a few things there. Frank and I did pick up something, a flu or something, for a couple days. Frank and Earl went to the St. Louis Arch and went up that. I'm sorry I missed that, but it was just the way it went. We did some sledding on some hillsides. It was cold. One day I remember the temperature being, the high of the day was -10. Oof. Now, coming from California, unless you live up in the top part of the Sierra Nevadas, you don't see that ever.
Yeah.
But and also every day on the news when we watched it with Grandpa, there was this place called Florida. Coming from California again, we barely knew where Florida was. We probably knew where Europe was better than we knew Florida at the time. And every day was 70 degrees, 75. Key West was 80. And we're looking at the map on the wall, or the calendar on the wall, it's December 29th. It's this. So, we start thinking, maybe that's where we need to head next. We're tired of being cold. We've been cold almost since the Grand Canyon.
Yeah. Several weeks now.
6 weeks or so. We've been some form of cold. One day it was so cold, we stayed in our sleeping bags the entire day, another night.
Wow.
And spent, we couldn't get the truck started. I guess that was the reason we stayed in our sleeping bags. Then it finally warmed up enough where the battery would start the truck.
Well, that's how Florida gets you. That's actually our single best selling point, right?
Probably is, especially in the wintertime.
Come the wintertime,
especially in the
everybody's
wintertime.
looking at 70 degrees. They don't talk about the 100% humidity or the 95 degrees the rest of the year.
So anyway, we were there New Year's Eve, so we decided to go to this party. And we showed up, again, as you put it, maybe minor celebrities, more like, I think, animals let out of the zoo, curiosity about us. And people were talking to us, and some of the local hippies, if you will, wanted to know where to go in California, where to do this, where's the best surfing, And it was hard to explain to them that we grew up in the middle of the valley. There wasn't too much surfing going on there.
Local hippie cells in Missouri.
Kind of. They were the advance guard for Kansas and Missouri, you know. And, some of the women, some of the girls were curious to know what California boys look like and this kind of stuff. So the sheriff was there, and he was having a good time. Everybody was drinking, and it was New Year's. And so in the course of this revelry, somehow, I think it was right after midnight, everybody, I don't remember watching the ball drop, but it was midnight. Everybody was, hooray, New Year's. And somebody handed Frank in the kitchen a bottle of champagne, cold duck champagne, to open. So Frank takes the foil off, and as he's undoing the wire attachment part, the sheriff is standing about 3 feet in front of him.
Oh, boy.
And he's got the bottle down by his waist, unfortunately pointing towards the sheriff. And he pulled the wire off, and the cork flew out of there and hit the sheriff right between the eyes, knocked him down on the floor in the kitchen of this house. And he had a little cold duck imprint on his skin.
Wow.
And I looked at Frank, and I says, "Time for us to leave."
He shot the sheriff.
He shot the sheriff.
Good grief.
And so 2 days later, we packed up and we headed out of town early one morning south towards New Orleans. And that was Grandma's orgy. Wow. And I never did find out if she ate Grandma or husband number 4 or not, but
didn't follow up.
But I'm sure she made a sandwich out of him somewhere.
Boy. Oh boy.
But,
well, I'll tell you, these are the stories that that I was enamored of.
It again, nothing was planned, virtually. It was just day-to-day living for us. We had no worries. I was 20. Frank was 21. Earl turned 22 in December that year. We were all about the same age. I don't know how much money we had. We had several hundred or a couple $1,000s a piece, which was a fortune back in those days, working all summer and that kind of stuff, and money we saved. And in most cases, our parents gave us another few $100s to take with us, and stuff like that.
It sounds like a different time.
It was. It was. It's not that people couldn't do something similar to that these days. I'm sure there's plenty of people who were young like that, and maybe before they went to college, or maybe they broke it in the middle like we did. I'm still waiting to go back to college.
Waiting for that degree.
The other two did go back and get degrees. Frank actually got a degree in juvenile law enforcement and stayed and and eventually got a career in it.
Pulling from his time as a juvenile.
Taking care of me and Earl, I think, and the dog. And one other quick note for that story is we decided that Zephyr. No, that wasn't then. It was later. We decided to ship Zephyr home. It was after we got to the Keys.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because,
so, that's the thing, is that this is definitely going to be a multi-part series if we can convince you to come back on, because I think we leave off just before New Orleans, and if I'm not mistaken, there's some fun that was had there as well.
There was fun had there, but it was a month. We went through New Orleans on our way to eventually down to the Keys, but we left the Keys and went to Mardi Gras in February.
Okay.
So there's still some time going through there, and then there's a story about several stories about being in the Keys, and one that changed my life.
Yeah.
And I call that one the flip of the coin.
Flip of the coin.
Because there was a coin involved, and it was flipped.
Think we can get you to come back on the show sometime?
I'd be happy to. I enjoy reliving my life, and again, as I've told you, part of this is so my daughter and my grandsons can maybe hear some of the stories if I get killed going to lunch today. So,
thanks so much for coming on the show.
Well, thanks for having me. It's been fun.
I look forward to the next couple of parts.
Chapter 2.
Right. All right. Thanks again.